What if a man walked out of prison, only to discover that time itself no longer recognized him? No past, no future, no place where he officially existed. This is not science fiction. This is a real documented case buried inside sealed judicial archives. One so disturbing that authorities later claimed the prisoner had never been real at all. The man's name was Elias Vorn, or at least, that's the name written on his prison file. In November 1943, during the height of World War II, Elias Vorn was transferred to a high-security detention facility in Eastern Europe. His crime was listed vaguely as identity fraud and unauthorized presence. No murder, no espionage, no violence, just presence. Guards found that strange even then. People weren't usually imprisoned during wartime unless they posed a clear threat. But Elias was placed in solitary confinement under strict orders. No interviews, no questions, no release date. From the moment he arrived, problems began. Elias looked wrong, not injured, not sick, just out of place. Medical staff couldn't estimate his age. His teeth showed no wear consistent with childhood diets of the era. His fingerprints didn't match any National Registry civilian or military. When asked basic questions, Elias answered calmly, but his responses unsettled everyone who heard them. He spoke fluent German, French, and Russian, but with no recognizable regional accent. His handwriting didn't match contemporary styles, and when asked his birth year, he hesitated, then gave an answer that made the interrogator laugh. "I don't know which calendar you're using." That laughter stopped when the paperwork was checked. Elias Vorn did not exist in any national database. No birth certificate, no school record, no employment history, no border crossing logs. It was as if the man had appeared from nowhere. But the most disturbing detail was yet to come. During intake processing, a clerk noticed Elias's personal effects included a small metal object, a coin-like disc with unfamiliar markings. It was confiscated and sent for analysis. Days later, the report came back inconclusive. The metal composition didn't match any known alloy in wartime Europe. The report was sealed. The object disappeared. Inside his cell, Elias waited. Weeks passed, then months. Guards reported that he never aged. His hair did not grow. His face did not change. Prison logs from 1943 and 1946 described him exactly the same way, down to scars and posture. One guard years later would testify. It felt like he wasn't living time the way we were, like time was moving around him. In 1951, the prison underwent administrative restructuring. Files were reviewed. Inmate lists updated. That was when officials realized something impossible. Elias Vorn's incarceration date no longer made sense. According to revised records, he had been imprisoned before the prison itself was built. The discrepancy was dismissed as clerical error, until the day Elias walked out of his cell and vanished from recorded history entirely. No release papers, no escape alarm, no witnesses who agreed on what they saw. Only one thing remained certain: Elias Vorn did not escape prison. He escaped something far more dangerous. He escaped time itself. Elias Vorn was never formally tried. That alone made his case an anomaly in a system obsessed with documentation. Wartime prisons moved quickly: arrests, interrogations, sentencing, transfers, but Elias existed in a legal limbo. His file contained no court transcript, No verdict, no judge's signature. Only a single stamped line repeated on every form. Detained pending temporal verification. No officer could later explain what that phrase meant. Interrogations were attempted in late 1943, but they went nowhere. Elias answered questions politely, precisely, and always just wrong enough to unsettle his interrogators. When asked where he was born, he gave a city that would not exist for another 40 years. When asked about the war, he described its outcome with uncomfortable accuracy, naming borders that had not yet been drawn. The interviews were cut short. Psychiatrists were brought in next. They tested for delusion, schizophrenia, confabulation. Elias showed none. His cognition was intact. His memory consistent. His emotional responses appropriate but detached, like someone recalling events they had already lived through once. One doctor wrote, "The subject exhibits familiarity with events not yet occurred. This is not prediction. It is recollection." That report was sealed. Prison staff noticed other oddities. Clocks near Elias's cell frequently malfunctioned. Mechanical watches lost time when guards stood too close to his door. One guard claimed his pocket watch began ticking backward during night shift. Maintenance blamed magnetism. No source was found. Elias himself never asked questions. He read when allowed. He slept irregularly. He never marked days on his wall. When a guard joked about losing track of time, Elias replied softly, "Time doesn't lose track of us. It just moves on without certain people." In 1947, a new warden attempted to resolve the case. He ordered a full review of Elias Vaughan's intake records. The review made things worse. The original arrest date had changed. On older copies of the file, Elias was arrested in November 1943. On newer ones, the date read March 1921. In one version, later dismissed as corrupted, the arrest was listed as August 1889. Same name, same description, same fingerprints. Different centuries. Archivists assumed duplication errors. But when they compared the physical paper, the ink and aging matched the date printed on each page. The documents were not altered later. They were created that way. The prison's construction records added another layer of impossibility. Blueprints dated 1939 showed a storage room where Elias's cell should be. But earlier floor plans dated 1920 already labeled the same space as occupied. By whom? By Elias. The conclusion no one wanted to say aloud began to take shape. Elias Vaughan had not been imprisoned at one moment in time. He had been intersecting the prison across multiple moments at once. A sentence with no beginning, no end. Just a man anchored to a place while time shifted around him. In 1951, the warden prepared a formal request for Elias's release. The paperwork was drafted, signed, and filed. But when the release order reached the cell, there was no prisoner inside. The door was locked, the bed undisturbed, the air cold and still, and the release form now carried a new stamp, subject nitrogen monoxide, longer synchronized. After Elias Vaughan vanished from his cell, officials assumed publicly that an escape had occurred. Internally, no one believed it. The cell showed no damage. The lock was intact. No guard reported opening the door. And most disturbingly, the surveillance measures added after the war showed no gap in observation. Elias hadn't fled. He had simply stopped being there. But one thing remained. The confiscated metal disc, logged years earlier and long forgotten, was suddenly flagged during a post-escape audit. The evidence room inventory showed it was still present, sealed in a lead-lined container, untouched since 1943. When technicians opened the box, they immediately noticed something impossible. The object had not aged. No oxidation, no corrosion, no micro-scratches. Even more unsettling, the evidence tag attached to it had aged paper yellowed, ink faded, string brittle. But the disc itself looked newly made, as if time refused to mark it. Metallurgists were called. Spectrographic analysis failed repeatedly. The object's atomic structure showed irregularities, layered densities that did not conform to known physics. One scientist wrote in his notes, "This is not an alloy. This is a process." Under magnification, faint symbols became visible on the disk's surface. They were not letters, numbers, or known geometric patterns. They resembled overlapping timelines, curves intersecting at inconsistent angles. No two observers could agree on what they were seeing. Then came the effect. Anyone who handled the disk for more than a few minutes experienced temporal disorientation. Seconds felt stretched. Minutes collapsed. One technician swore he had been in the lab for hours, yet the clock showed only 30 seconds had passed. Another reported the opposite. He blinked and an entire afternoon was gone. The disk did not emit radiation. It produced no measurable field. And yet, time around it behaved incorrectly. An internal memo linked the object directly to Elias Vorn. The subject and the artifact display synchronized anomalies. Removal of subject did not neutralize the phenomenon, which raised a frightening possibility. What if Elias wasn't the source of the anomaly? What if he was the stabilizer? Further tests revealed something even stranger. When the disk was brought near Elias's former cell, the air temperature normalized. Clocks behaved. The disorientation stopped. It was as if the object was trying to anchor itself to a specific point in space, a point Elias had once occupied. In 1953, the object was quietly transferred to a deeper storage facility under a different code name. The official reason, unresolved material hazard. Unofficially, the reason was simpler. Without Elias Vorn, no one knew how to control it. One final experiment was authorized before the transfer. A researcher placed the disk on a table and asked a simple question aloud. "Who are you for?" According to the lab log, the disk vibrated once subtly, almost imperceptibly, and a phrase appeared etched into its surface, as if it had always been there, now merely revealed by the light. For the one who fell out of time. After that, no further testing was approved, because the object wasn't just proof that Elias Vorn had existed. It was proof that time itself had let him go, and it might do so again. Once Elias Vorn vanished, the authorities did what they always did best. They buried the case. Files were sealed. Names were changed. The prison itself was repurposed. Officially, the story ended in 1951. Unofficially, that's when it began again. The first post-disappearance sighting was reported in 1957, nearly 6 years after Elias vanished from his cell. A man matching his exact description was detained briefly at a border checkpoint in southern France. The officer on duty noted that the traveler's papers were immaculately preserved, but outdated in a way that felt intentional. The man identified himself as Elias Vorn. When questioned about his age, he gave the same answer recorded in prison files years earlier. When asked where he had come from, he replied calmly, "From a place that no longer has a year." The officer laughed it off until the fingerprints came back. They matched perfectly. But here's the problem. The prints were compared against Elias's prison records, which by then were classified and supposedly inaccessible. No one could explain how a border station had obtained them or why the match result disappeared from the system less than an hour later. By the time supervisors arrived, the man was gone. No footage, no exit log. No memory among staff that agreed on what he looked like. Only a single handwritten note remained on the intake desk. He didn't cross the border. The border crossed him. More sightings followed. In 1969, a hospital in Buenos Aires recorded a patient admitted for temporal disorientation. He spoke multiple languages, showed no signs of aging, and predicted a major power outage that occurred exactly 12 hours later. He vanished before sunrise. His bed was cold. In 1984, a private detective in Chicago documented an encounter with a man who knew details about a cold case that had never been released to the public. Details only the killer and investigators could have known. The detective described him as a man who spoke like he'd already seen how everything ended. In every case, the description was identical. Same face, same posture, same unsettling calm, and never any proof that lasted. What frightened investigators most was not that Elias appeared across different places, but that he appeared across different decades, unchanged. Photographs taken by witnesses showed the same distortion. Elias's outline slightly blurred, as if the camera couldn't decide where to place him in the frame. Film analysts later described it as chronological misalignment. Time didn't know where to put him. A classified task force was formed briefly in the late 1980s. Its mandate was simple: determine whether Elias Vaughan was a hoax, a shared delusion, or something else entirely. Their conclusion was never officially released, but a leaked summary suggested something far more unsettling. The subject is not traveling through time intentionally. He is being displaced by it, appearing only where instability already exists. If true, that meant Elias wasn't causing the anomalies. He was drawn to them, a prisoner once held in a cell, now wandering the cracks between moments, which raised an unbearable question. If Elias Vaughan escaped time, was he truly free? Or was he now serving a far longer sentence, moving endlessly through years that could never hold him? As sightings of Elias Vaughan accumulated across decades, investigators encountered a new and deeply unsettling problem. His identity would not remain stable. In official records, Elias's name began to drift. Some documents listed him as Elijah Vaughan, others as E. Vaughan, A. Vaughan, or simply Subject Null. Attempts to standardize the record only made it worse. The more effort applied, the more inconsistencies appeared, as if the concept of a single, fixed identity refused to attach itself to him. This wasn't simple clerical error. Linguists noticed that the variations followed linguistic trends of the era in which the document was created. In 1950s files, his name aligned with post-war phonetics. In 1980s records, it adapted to modern spelling conventions. Elias's identity was unconsciously being rewritten by the time observing him. Witness accounts showed the same pattern. People who encountered him remembered different details, eye color, accent, even height. Yet when descriptions were compared side by side, a strange truth emerged. Every witness described the version of Elias that best fit their own time. To a 1940s guard, he was formal, restrained, almost old-fashioned. To a 1970s doctor, he was distant, clinical, modern. To a 2000s witness, he seemed quiet, detached, and deeply tired. Elias was not changing. Perception was. Psychologists reviewing the case proposed a radical hypothesis. Elias no longer possessed a stable temporal identity. Instead, he existed as a reference point, interpreted differently depending on when and by whom he was observed. One internal report stated, "The subject's identity is no longer internally anchored. It is externally reconstructed." In other words, Elias Vorn did not carry a past with him. The present kept rebuilding him. This explained another disturbing phenomenon. Background checks on Elias occasionally returned partial matches to living individuals, people who shared fragments of his identity but had no connection to him. A teacher in Prague, a dock worker in Lisbon, a librarian in Montreal. Each claimed to experience episodes of déjà vu, lost time, or dreams of imprisonment in a place they had never been. They were not Elias, but something about him had brushed against them, as if pieces of his displaced identity were shedding into the timeline, embedding themselves in others, briefly, imperfectly. Authorities quietly flagged these individuals as secondary temporal echoes. None were detained, all were monitored, most were forgotten. One final detail terrified the task force. Whenever Elias appeared, nearby records showed micro-revisions, dates shifting by days, minor historical details correcting themselves, events subtly reordering. Not enough to change history, just enough to smooth inconsistencies. It was as if time itself was adjusting around Elias, compensating for his presence, which suggested a grim truth. Elias Vorn wasn't merely lost in time, he was damaging it, not through violence or intent, but through existence. A man without a fixed identity moving through a system that required one. By the early 2000s, the task force disbanded. Their final recommendation was simple and chilling. Do not pursue the subject. Observation increases instability. Let Elias drift. Let time heal around him. Because the more clearly the world tried to define who he was, the more reality itself began to blur. In 2006, something changed. For the first time since Elias Vorn's disappearance, time did not merely bend around him, it pushed back. The event occurred in a small commuter town in northern Germany, where a routine train delay escalated into what officials later called a synchronization anomaly. 3 trains arriving from different directions stopped on the same track at the same position, despite being scheduled years apart according to archived timetables. Engineers blamed a software error. Then witnesses reported seeing a man standing calmly between the tracks. He did not belong there, and yet no one thought to run. Security footage captured him for exactly 9 seconds. In those 9 seconds, Elias Vorn looked older than ever before, lines on his face, shoulders heavy, eyes filled with something close to relief, as if he had finally reached the right moment. Railway clocks across the station froze. The digital displays glitched, briefly showing dates from multiple decades, at once 1961, 1989, 2014, before going dark. Passengers later said the air felt thick, like breathing inside a paused second. Elias raised his head, and for the first time in any recorded encounter, he spoke loudly, clearly, to no one in particular. It's trying to close the gap. Then he stepped forward, not onto the tracks, but out of frame. The footage corrupted instantly. When systems rebooted, the trains were no longer on the same line. Their positions corrected themselves as if the overlap had never occurred. Official reports showed a normal delay. No incident, but internal observers knew better. Temporal analysts and unofficial designation reviewed the data and reached a conclusion that echoed fears long buried. Time was no longer tolerating Elias's displacement. One document summarized it bluntly. The system is attempting self-repair. For decades, Elias had drifted through weak points, places where history was already unstable. Wars, borders, disasters, moments where timelines were thin, but now those weak points were closing. Technology had tightened the weave of time. Atomic clocks, global synchronization, continuous digital record-keeping. There were fewer cracks to slip through, which meant Elias was running out of places to exist. Following the 2006 incident, sightings of Elias became more erratic and more dangerous. Witnesses reported severe disorientation, memory collapse, and in one case, a man aged nearly 10 years and a single night after speaking with him. Time was no longer adjusting gently. It was tearing. A final internal meeting, never officially acknowledged, posed a question no one wanted to answer. What happens when time finishes correcting itself? Two possibilities were proposed. Either Elias would be reabsorbed, collapsed back into the moment he first fell out of sequence, or he would be expelled, entirely removed, not just from history, but from existence. Neither outcome could be controlled, and for the first time the conclusion was no longer about containment. It was about survival, because if time failed to correct Elias cleanly, the damage wouldn't end with him. As Elias Vaughn's appearances grew more unstable, investigators noticed a final pattern, one that tied his fate back to where it had all begun. Prisons. Not specific buildings, but the idea of them. Elias was never seen in open, joyful places. He appeared near borders, hospitals, court buildings, abandoned stations, and detention facilities, spaces defined by waiting, judgment, and suspended futures. Places where time already moved differently. In 2011, a classified urban development plan surfaced briefly in a European municipal archive. It detailed a proposed detention complex scheduled for construction on the outskirts of a growing city. The project was later canceled, officially due to funding issues. But the plans contained a disturbing anomaly. One cell 17, was fully detailed, down to wear patterns on the floor and wall scuffs, despite the building never being constructed. The blueprints described it as pre-existing occupancy anomaly. Architects denied adding the note. Security analysts cross-referenced the dimensions. They matched Elias Vaughn's original cell. Exactly. The implication was staggering. Wherever Elias went, structures adjusted in advance. Space prepared itself for him, as if reality expected his arrival before he did. Shortly after the discovery, a night guard working near the proposed site reported seeing a man standing in the empty field where the prison would have been built. The guard described him as exhausted but peaceful. He looked like someone who'd been walking for a very long time, the guard said, and thought he'd finally found where he was supposed to stop. When questioned, the guard produced a sketch. It was Elias. This led to a horrifying theory. Elias was not wandering randomly. He was being guided. Time wasn't just correcting itself. It was trying to return him to a state of containment. Not a specific place, but a role, a prisoner. Something that did not belong in the flow of history, held still so the rest of time could move safely around it. One internal paper stated, The subject represents unresolved temporal displacement. Containment may be the only stable configuration, but how do you imprison someone time itself can't hold? The answer, disturbingly, was already visible. Every place Elias appeared began to show signs of preparation. Locked doors that were never used. Empty rooms with reinforced walls. Digital systems assigning identification numbers to people who hadn't arrived yet. Reality was building a prison around him piece by piece, which meant Elias's escape from his original cell may never have been freedom. It may have been delay. And delay was ending. The last confirmed sighting occurred in 2016, near an unfinished underground transit tunnel. Witnesses saw a man sit calmly on a concrete bench that hadn't been installed yet. He looked at his hands, then he smiled, as if he finally understood something, as if he knew where the path led. And for the first time since 1951, Elias Vorn did not vanish abruptly. He faded slowly like a figure being gently edited out of a frame, leaving behind only one thought, written in chalk on the tunnel wall. I think I found where I belong. In 2019, an archivist in a newly digitized European records facility noticed something strange. A file labeled Vorn E appeared in the system without being scanned, uploaded, or entered. There was no record of its creation, no metadata trail. It simply existed. The file contained 8 sections. No more, no less. Each section corresponded exactly to the phases investigators had once used internally to track Elias Vorn's case: detention, anomaly, disappearance, sightings, identity drift, correction, containment, closure. As if the case itself had written its own ending, the archivist reported the anomaly. By morning, the file was gone. But not before she noticed one final detail. The status field, usually left blank for unresolved cases, had been filled in. Status. Resolved how? No death certificate existed. No confirmed reappearance. No temporal event logged. Yet after 2016, there were no further sightings, no distortions, no micro-revisions. Time stabilized. It was as if a long-standing error had finally been corrected. A post-case analysis quietly circulated among a few remaining analysts proposed the final theory. Elias Vorn was not erased. He was reinserted. Returned not to a moment, but to a function. The prison that was never built did not need walls or guards. It was a fixed data point where Elias could exist without moving, without tearing the fabric of time around him. A permanent pause. In that state, Elias was no longer out of sync. He was aligned by being still. The metal disc confiscated decades earlier was checked one final time. It had changed. For the first time, its surface showed signs of aging. Microscopic corrosion. Hairline scratches. Time had begun to touch it. The inscription was gone. In its place, a new phrase appeared, simpler, quieter, balance restored. No further testing was conducted. The case of Elias Vorn was officially closed, not by a committee, not by an order, but by reality itself. Yet one detail remains unresolved. Every few years, in places where people wait, prisons, hospitals, border stations, someone reports an odd feeling. A sense that time has slowed just enough to breathe. And in those moments, a thought crosses their mind, uninvited. What if someone else is waiting here, so the rest of us don't have to? If that's true, then Elias Vorn didn't escape time. He took its sentence upon himself. And somewhere outside years, Outside clocks, a prisoner remains, not forgotten, just necessary.